Right now, inside your gut, there is a war happening. Trillions of bacteria, good and bad, are fighting for territory, and depending on who's winning, the outcome shows up everywhere: your energy, your weight, your skin, your blood pressure, even how inflamed your joints feel when you wake up. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. Scientists at Stanford didn't just theorize about this, they tested it. They took healthy adults, split them into 2 groups, and had one group eat a specific category of food 6 times a day for 10 weeks. The result wasn't a small improvement. 19 separate inflammatory markers in their blood, including one directly linked to arthritis, diabetes, and heart disease, dropped uniformly in 10 weeks. That food category isn't a supplement, it isn't a pill, it's sitting in grocery stores right now, and most people walk past it because they don't know what they're actually looking for, or worse, they're buying the fake version and getting zero benefit. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which 10 foods can trigger that kind of rapid internal repair. The precise science behind why each one works, and this is critical: how to spot the imposter versions on store shelves that look identical but do absolutely nothing for your body. Stick around, because food number 7 contains an enzyme so powerful it can interfere with blood-thinning medication. That's how serious this gets. Before we get into the list, we need to clear up the single biggest misunderstanding in gut health, because if you don't know this, everything else in this video won't matter. Not every fermented food is a probiotic food. Say that again in your head, because the food industry is counting on you not knowing the difference. The official scientific definition, set by the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics, says a probiotic has to be a live microorganism that delivers a proven health benefit when you eat enough of it. Live, proven enough. 3 conditions. Miss one, and you've just got flavored food. Fermentation itself is just a process: bacteria or yeast breaking down sugars, creating that tangy, complex flavor we associate with foods like sauerkraut or sourdough. But here's the twist: heat kills bacteria. So the second a fermented food gets baked, boiled, or pasteurized, the live cultures responsible for the health benefits are dead. You're eating the flavor without the function. That means most sourdough bread on grocery shelves, dead cultures baked at high heat; most canned, shelf-stable sauerkraut sitting next to the canned vegetables, pasteurized into sterility. Even some pickles marketed with old-timey labels are sitting in vinegar, not a living bacterial brine. So how do you actually tell the difference? It's simpler than you'd think, and once you know it, you'll never be fooled again. Live probiotic foods need refrigeration, because the bacteria inside them are still active and would keep fermenting, sometimes violently, at room temperature. If it's sitting on a shelf at room temperature for months, it's dead. If the liquid in a jar of pickles is cloudy rather than crystal clear, that cloudiness is actually the visual signature of healthy bacteria thriving. Clear brine usually means vinegar, not fermentation. Keep that one rule in your back pocket: refrigerated and alive versus shelf-stable and dead, because we're about to go through 10 foods. And that single distinction determines whether you're getting real results or wasting your money. Number 1, yogurt. Let's start with the one everyone already has in their fridge, because even here, most people are doing it wrong. Yogurt is milk that's been cultured with lactic acid bacteria. Specifically 2 strains that are legally required for anything called yogurt: Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus. Many premium brands go further, adding extra clinically studied strains like Bifidobacterium lactis. But the only way any of these bacteria survive is if the yogurt is never heated after fermentation. This is where most people accidentally destroy their own probiotics without realizing it. You bake yogurt into muffins, stir it into a hot curry, or microwave it to take the chill off, and in that moment, you've cooked the bacteria to death. You're left with a dairy product that tastes like yogurt but functions like plain cooked milk. So what's it actually doing when eaten cold and properly? The European Food Safety Authority has officially confirmed a direct cause and effect relationship between live yogurt cultures and improved lactose digestion. The bacteria literally produce the enzyme lactase as they travel through your small intestine, breaking down the lactose that would otherwise cause bloating and discomfort. On top of that, regular yogurt consumption is consistently linked in research to better weight management and a lower incidence of type 2 diabetes. Want to maximize it? Pair it with something the bacteria can actually eat: bananas, oats, flaxseed. You're not just feeding yourself, you're feeding the colony you just swallowed, helping it survive and multiply instead of passing straight through. One quick caution: if you have a severe dairy protein allergy, this one's off the table entirely. And if you're severely immunocompromised, talk to your doctor before loading up on concentrated live bacteria of any kind. We'll come back to why that matters later. Now, yogurt is the gateway. But there's a cousin to yogurt that the research shows is even more potent, and it's drinkable. Number 2, kefir. Kefir looks like yogurt's thinner, fizzier sibling, and that resemblance is deceiving, because what's actually fermenting it is wildly more complex. Yogurt relies on a couple of bacterial strains. Kefir is made using something called kefir grains, not actual grains, but a rubbery cluster of bacteria and yeast bound together, capable of housing up to 60 different microbial strains in a single culture. 60. That's not a probiotic food, that's an entire ecosystem in a glass. And that ecosystem does measurable things inside your body. Clinical research shows kefir significantly improves lactose tolerance, similar to yogurt. But it goes further. During fermentation, kefir generates bioactive peptides with a specific function. They inhibit an enzyme called ACE, the same enzyme that many blood pressure medications target. In trials, this translated into actual reductions in systolic blood pressure, and in separate crossover studies, fermented milk, fortified with specific bifidobacterium strains, noticeably sped up gut transit time, directly relieving functional constipation. Drink it cold, straight from the glass, or blend it into a smoothie with fiber-rich fruit. That combination doesn't just taste good. It actively supports the yeast bacteria consortium surviving long enough to do its job. One thing worth knowing up front, when you first introduce kefir, don't panic if you feel a little bloated or crampy. That's not a bad reaction. That's your gut microbiome recalibrating to a new, more diverse population of bacteria. It typically settles within days. Also worth noting, because kefir ferments using yeast, it does contain trace amounts of alcohol, which matters for certain sensitive groups. So we've covered dairy, but some of the most powerful probiotic foods on this list aren't dairy at all, they're vegetables. And one of them just went through a clinical trial that should make every IBS sufferer pay close attention. Number 3. Sauerkraut. Sauerkraut has a reputation as a sandwich topping. Clinically, it's something closer to medicine. Real sauerkraut ferments using bacteria that are already living on raw cabbage leaves. Nothing added, nothing artificial. The fermentation actually shifts in stages. It starts with one bacterial strain, Leuconostoc mesenteroides, and as the brine gets more acidic, that population gets replaced by Lactobacillus plantarum and Lactobacillus brueis. It's a microbial relay race happening inside a jar. Here's where it gets genuinely impressive. A randomized double-blind pilot study on Norwegian IBS patients had them eat 75 grams of lacto-fermented sauerkraut daily. That's about 2 to 3 tablespoons for 6 weeks. Their IBS symptom severity scores dropped significantly, and in a fascinating twist, both the regular and the pasteurized version of the sauerkraut helped with symptoms, likely thanks to fiber and leftover bacterial byproducts. But only the unpasteurized, truly alive version actually changed the gut microbiota itself, measurably increasing beneficial Lactobacillus plantarum in participants' stool samples. Translation: even the dead version gave some benefit, but the live version rewired the gut. That's the difference refrigeration makes. Eat it raw, as a cold condiment, never as part of a dish that gets cooked after the kraut goes in. And start small, because sauerkraut is naturally high in sodium from the brining process, and it's also rich in histamine. So if you have high blood pressure, kidney issues, or histamine intolerance, ease in carefully, and if you load up too fast, regardless, expect some bloating as your gut adjusts. Now, if sauerkraut is the original fermented cabbage, its Korean cousin takes things to an entirely different level, and the clinical results are honestly stunning. Number 4. Kimchi. Kimchi isn't just spicier sauerkraut. The ingredient list, napa, cabbage, radish, garlic, ginger, chili, creates a completely different and far more complex microbial environment, dominated by Leuconostoc, Weissella, and Lactobacillus strains working together. And the clinical data on kimchi is some of the strongest on this entire list. A randomized crossover trial on prediabetic patients found that eating fermented kimchi, as opposed to the same recipe, eaten fresh and unfermented, significantly decreased insulin resistance, improved insulin sensitivity, and lowered both systolic and diastolic blood pressure over 8 weeks. Same vegetables, same recipe. The only variable was fermentation, and that one variable changed actual blood chemistry. And remember that Stanford study from the opening of this video. Kimchi was one of the primary fermented foods used in that intervention, the one that dropped 19 inflammatory markers, including interleukin-6, a protein implicated in arthritis, diabetes, and heart disease. Eat it cold or at room temperature, around 100 grams as a side dish, to get that microbial benefit. Yes, it's incredible cooked into fried rice or stew, but high heat kills the live bacteria, so you're trading probiotic value for flavor at that point. If you've got GERD or active ulcers, the acidity and capsaicin here can aggravate symptoms, so proceed cautiously. We've covered dairy, we've covered fermented vegetables, but the next 2 foods come from an entirely different category, fermented soy, and one of them does something almost no other food on earth can do. It lowers cholesterol while feeding a specific bacteria linked to leanness. Number 5. Tempeh. Tempeh gets constantly confused with tofu, but they're nothing alike. Tofu is just pressed soy milk curd. Tempeh is the entire soybean, fermented whole by a fungus called Rhizopus oligosporus, creating a dense, firm cake packed with texture and nutrition tofu simply doesn't have. Now here's an interesting wrinkle. Tempeh has to be cooked before eating, for safety. So technically, you're killing the live fungus. Does that mean you lose the benefit? Not even close, and this is one of the most underrated facts in this entire video. When the microbial cells die, their internal structures called paraprobiotics remain behind, and research shows those leftover structures still interact powerfully with your immune system. In a 28-day human trial, participants who ate steamed tempeh saw a measurable increase in Akkermansia, Mucinophila, and Bifidobacterium to bacterial populations, consistently linked to a leaner metabolic profile and lower obesity risk. Even more striking, tempeh consumption boosted the secretion of immunoglobulin A in the gut, which is a frontline immune defender, lining your intestinal walls. And the fermentation process unlocks bioavailable soy isoflavones that clinical research connects to real reductions in total and LDL cholesterol. So cook it, steam it, bake it, saute it lightly. There's no probiotic survival to protect here. Just be aware, if you have a severe soy allergy, this one's a hard no. Otherwise, despite old myths about soy and hormones, current science says fermented soy isoflavones are safe and beneficial in normal dietary amounts. If tempeh proves dead bacteria can still heal you, our next food proves something even stranger, that the same fermentation process can completely neutralize sodium's usual effect on your blood pressure. Number 6. Miso. Miso should, on paper, be terrible for your blood pressure. It's a fermented soybean paste, and ounce for ounce, it delivers around 43% of your recommended daily sodium. By every conventional rule of nutrition, that should spike blood pressure. It doesn't. And researchers were so surprised by this that they ran a double-blind trial specifically to investigate it. Long-term miso soup consumption in people with high normal 2 stage 1 hypertension actually lowered their nighttime blood pressure, despite the sodium load. The leading theory, the specific bioactive peptides created by miso's fungal fermentation using a starter called koji, have that same ACE inhibitory action we saw in kefir, essentially counteracting the sodium's typical effect on the cardiovascular system. This is a genuine paradox in nutrition science. High sodium food, lower blood pressure outcomes. That's not something you see often, and it's exactly why scientists keep coming back to fermentation as one of the most underexplored levers in human health. To get this benefit, dissolve miso paste into warm, not boiling broth, only after you've taken it off direct heat. Boiling destroys the delicate enzymes and live cultures responsible for the effect you're after. And to be clear, if you're on a strict sodium-restricted protocol for something like advanced heart failure or kidney disease, this isn't a casual addition. Talk to your doctor first. Now, we're moving into the 2 foods on this list with arguably the most extreme, almost unbelievable clinical results, starting with one that produces an enzyme capable of dissolving blood clots. Number 7. Natto. I want to warn you up front, natto is polarizing. It's a fermented whole soybean with a pungent smell and a stringy mucilaginous texture that most Western palates need time to adjust to. But I'm including it on this list because the clinical data behind it is, frankly, extraordinary. Natto is fermented exclusively by Bacillus subtilis, a spore-forming bacterium so tough it can survive your stomach acid and reach your intestines fully alive, almost guaranteed, every single time. That alone makes it one of the most reliably effective probiotics on Earth. But the real headline here is what natto contains. It's the richest known natural source of vitamin K2, specifically a form called MK7. Your body needs MK7 to activate a protein called osteocalcin, which is responsible for actually binding calcium into your bones. Long-term observational research on postmenopausal Japanese women found that habitual natto consumption was linked to significantly slower bone density loss and a notably reduced risk of fractures. We're talking about a food-fermented soybean directly tied to skeletal strength in aging populations. And then there's nattokinase, an enzyme generated during fermentation with genuine fibrinolytic activity, meaning it can help dissolve blood clots, reduce blood viscosity, lower blood pressure, and shows early clinical promise for stabilizing arterial plaque. Eat it cold, traditionally over rice, mixed with soy sauce or mustard to cut the texture. Whatever you do, don't wash off or heat that stringy coating. That's exactly where the therapeutic enzyme lives. Here's the critical safety note, and I need you to actually hear this one, because nattokinase actively breaks down fibrin and vitamin K2 heavily influences blood clotting, Natto can interact dangerously with blood-thinning medications, like warfarin. If you're on an anticoagulant, do not add natto to your diet without talking to your cardiologist first. This is not an exaggeration. This is one of the few foods on this entire list with a genuine, documented medication interaction. So we've gone from blood clot dissolving soybeans to something equally unexpected, a fizzy tea that recently outperformed expectations in a diabetes trial. Number 8. Kombucha. Kombucha exploded from a niche health food item into a billion-dollar shelf staple, and for once, some of the hype is actually catching up to real clinical evidence. It's fermented sweetened tea, using something called a SCOBY, a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. Genetic sequencing of commercial kombucha shows a roughly even mix of lactic acid bacteria, acetic acid bacteria, and a specific yeast called Kefir, creating one of the most diverse liquid probiotic matrices on this list. In 2023, Georgetown University ran a randomized, double-blind crossover trial specifically on adults with type 2 diabetes. Participants drank 8 ounces of kombucha daily for 4 weeks. Their average fasting blood glucose dropped from 164 milligrams per deciliter down to 116. The placebo group saw no meaningful change at all. That's not a marginal supplement effect. That's a substantial swing in blood sugar from a beverage, driven largely by acetic acid and microbial metabolites that appear to blunt post-meal glucose spikes. Now, and this matters, kombucha needs sugar to ferment. The SCOBY consumes most of it during the process, which is why a properly fermented kombucha ends up relatively low in sugar. The problem is, mass-market brands. Many pasteurize their kombucha after fermentation, which kills every live culture, and then dump in fruit juice to mask the flavor. Reintroducing the sugar, the fermentation process just worked so hard to remove. Read the label. If it doesn't say live or unpasteurized, you might be drinking flavored soda with extra steps. A couple of safety notes. Homebrewing carries real contamination risk if done improperly. The acidity can erode dental enamel with heavy long-term use, and like kefir, the fermentation process leaves trace alcohol in the final product. We've covered drinks, vegetables, and soy. Now let's talk about the food that's currently having the biggest cultural comeback in America. And most people have no idea it can be a probiotic at all. Number 9. Cottage cheese. Cottage cheese spent decades as the diet food nobody got excited about. That perception just flipped. Sales are climbing 20 to 30% a year, and there's a specific reason it deserves a spot on this list. Here's the nuance. Standard cottage cheese, straight off the shelf, is not a probiotic food. The curd-forming process doesn't naturally preserve live bacteria, but specific functional brands now deliberately add live cultures, typically Lactobacillus, Acidophilus, and Bifidobacterium, lactose back into the cheese after it's formed and cooled. That single step transforms an ordinary dairy product into a genuine probiotic delivery vehicle. And the macros are honestly elite for this category, somewhere around 14 to 16 grams of slow-digesting casein, protein in just a half cup, alongside calcium, phosphorus, and B12. Combine that protein density with the added bacterial strains, and you get a food that's heavily linked in research to satiety, muscle preservation, improved gut transit, and crowding out pathogenic bacteria in the intestine. Eat it cold, savory with tomatoes and black pepper, or sweet with berries and chia. Never bake or boil it if you want those added cultures to survive. And the catch here is simple. You have to check the label specifically for live and active cultures. Otherwise, you're just eating regular cottage cheese and missing the entire point. That brings us to our final food, and it might be the simplest, most overlooked probiotic on this entire list. Hiding in plain sight in a jar, most people walk past every single week. Number 10. Lacto-fermented pickles. Quick question. When's the last time you actually checked how your pickles were made? The overwhelming majority of pickles sold in American grocery stores are vinegar preserved and pasteurized, meaning, by definition, they have zero live bacteria. True lacto-fermented pickles are different. They're made with nothing but salt and water, allowing the naturally occurring lactobacillus, already living on the cucumber's skin, to flourish and convert sugar into lactic acid. These pickles enhance the bioavailability of the cucumber's natural antioxidants, introduce a steady supply of beneficial transient bacteria into your gut, and clinical research on lacto-fermented vegetables shows they help inhibit pathogenic bacteria, generate gut-nourishing short-chain fatty acids, and reduce localized intestinal inflammation. Remember that detail from earlier in the video: cloudy brine equals living bacteria, clear brine equals vinegar, and zero probiotic value. These pickles must be refrigerated and eaten cold. Leave them at room temperature, and they'll keep actively fermenting, building pressure, and in extreme cases, the container can genuinely bulge or burst. That's not spoilage, that's proof of life. Just watch your portions, because the sodium content used to prevent contamination is significant. So treat these as a garnish, not a side dish. So now you've got 10 foods. But here's the question that actually matters. Why does any of this work, biologically? The mechanism comes down to chronic low-grade inflammation, sometimes called inflammaging, and the integrity of your intestinal lining. When that lining gets compromised, sometimes called leaky gut, toxins from your gut bacteria leak into your bloodstream and trigger inflammation throughout your entire body, not just your digestive system. Short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, propionate, produced when gut bacteria break down fiber, are what seal that lining back up and calm that inflammatory cascade. And this brings us back to that Stanford study from the very beginning of this video, because the actual design deserves more detail. 36 healthy adults, 10 weeks. One group scaled up to 6 servings a day of fermented foods, yogurt, kefir, fermented cottage cheese, kimchi, kombucha. The other group ate a high-fiber diet instead. The fermented food group experienced a rapid spike in microbiome diversity and a uniform drop across 19 separate inflammatory proteins, including interleukin-6, a key driver behind rheumatoid arthritis, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. 10 weeks, real, measurable change in inflammatory blood markers. That's the science backing everything we just walked through. One last responsible note. If you're undergoing chemotherapy, managing advanced HIV, or dealing with short bowel syndrome, the National Institutes of Health advises real caution before loading up on live bacteria. There's a documented, if rare, risk of infection in severely immunocompromised individuals. If you have histamine intolerance or mast cell activation syndrome, fermented foods can trigger allergic-type reactions. And if you're on blood thinners, we already covered why Natto specifically needs medical clearance first. Here's the entire video in one sentence. Refrigerated and alive beets, shelf-stable and dead. Every single time, and somewhere between 4 and 10 weeks of consistent intake is where the real, measurable healing happens. Not overnight, not from a pill, from actually feeding the right bacteria, consistently, with real food. But here's something we didn't fully get into today. What happens on the other side of this story? While these 10 foods are busy healing your gut, there's a whole category of everyday foods quietly doing the exact opposite. Feeding the bad bacteria and undoing all of this progress without you even realizing it. I've got an entire video breaking down exactly which foods are silently destroying your gut microbiome right now, and honestly, after watching it, you might be shocked at what's sitting in your pantry. Click it, because what you avoid matters just as much as what you add.